Welcome to part 3 of EarthDeed's series on understanding and responding to our climate impacts. The first two videos established that climate change is real, humans are the primary cause, and detailed some possible future scenarios. This video will explore responses to climate change, first on the governmental and corporate levels, and then more importantly on the personal and community levels. Okay, so on the governmental level, the primary avenue that nations have been working to reduce greenhouse gas emissions is the Kyoto Protocol, sometimes known as the United Nations Climate Change Conference. And there have been at least 19 of these conferences since 1997, most recently in Warsaw, Poland. And while many countries, although not the US, have agreed to reduce their emissions and purchase carbon offsets for emissions they can't reduce, they're really just not going far enough. For example, the Kyoto Protocol required governments to reduce emissions by 5 to 10% by 2012. Despite these targets not being met, they were nowhere near the 60 to 80% reduction science suggests is needed within 20 to 30 years to prevent the worst case climate scenarios. The sad truth is politicians tend to only look ahead to the next election, when they really need to be thinking ahead many generations. Talking about climate change is a downer and tends not to get people elected. Now, in addition, while it's hard to go a day without hearing about some new corporate social responsibility effort, their responses have also been rather weak. According to the Carbon Disclosure Project, while 82% of the world's largest companies have set emission targets of some sort, most are short-term and average about 1% per year, which is well below the level of ambition needed to limit global warming to 2 degrees above pre-industrial levels. As long as our political and economic systems reward corporations for pilfering the commons and not accounting for their environmental impacts, they don't have much incentive to change their ways. So, while governments and corporations absolutely need to be at the table and be a part of solving the climate change crisis, I'm not convinced they're going to make the required changes within the time frame needed to preserve a healthy planet. But if not them, well, the who? Well, there is a bigger basket we can put our eggs into, and it's called community. You, me, us. We're the ones whose kids and grandkids will live in a climate-changed world. And we're the ones who are going to have to step up and create resilient and sustainable communities so they can grow up healthy and strong. And people are stepping up. There are growing networks around the world committed to supporting grassroots sustainability. For example, the Global Ecovillage Network is connecting sustainable communities around the world. Gaia Education runs trainings in over 30 countries in sustainable community development. The Transition Network has initiatives in over 500 cities and towns around the world. And tens of thousands have been trained in permaculture principles and practices. And Wiser Earth lists over 112,000 other organizations working for a just and sustainable world. Now, specifically related to climate change, another important network to understand is called the voluntary carbon market. As opposed to governments and large companies reducing their emissions and buying offsets to comply with the Kyoto Protocol, in the voluntary carbon market, individuals and small companies choose to purchase carbon offsets to mitigate their greenhouse gas emissions from their activities, notably transportation. And there are hundreds of companies selling carbon offsets, and the market is growing, with over 500 million transacted in 2012. So how does carbon offsetting work? Well, it's generally a three-step process. First, you measure your greenhouse gas emissions, and there's lots of online calculators to help you do this. Next, you hopefully reduce these emissions where possible, and then you purchase carbon offsets to mitigate your remaining emissions. So what exactly is a carbon offset? Well, essentially, a carbon offset is a reduction in emissions of carbon dioxide made in order to compensate for or to offset an emission made elsewhere. So when you buy an offset, you're basically purchasing the right to claim the environmental benefit of a particular project that you can then use to say that you have offset your emissions and have become carbon neutral. Offsetting projects tend to fall into one of three categories: renewable energy projects, such as wind, solar, hydro; efficiency projects, which can also result in cost savings; and capturing greenhouse gas emissions, either through industrial mechanisms or through sequestering CO2 by planting trees. Most of these are good projects doing important sustainability work. What's controversial is the selling of their mitigation of emissions in the form of offsets. And I'll review these controversies and propose an alternative in the next video. Thank you.